I honestly don't think that you should be keeping your emergency fund in one place. So hopefully I will be able to give you some ideas of different places and different ways to sort of have an emergency fund. Hi guys, so I wanted to talk about emergency funds because I feel like in the current climate, it's more important than ever to think about emergency funds. And it does worry me how few people actually have emergency funds when you talk to them. And I saw a statistic recently that I posted on my Instagram, which was basically that only a third of people in the world are financially literate with basic financial concepts, which is also a little bit scary. But I wanted to make this video as like a one-stop shop. Hopefully, do let me know if I've missed anything that you think I should have covered in this video. But I want to talk about, firstly, why you should have an emergency fund. So if you don't already have one, hopefully I will persuade you to make one. Secondly, where you should keep your emergency fund, because I honestly don't think that you should be keeping your emergency fund in one place. So hopefully I will be able to give you some ideas of different places and different ways to sort of have an emergency fund. And lastly, some ideas on how to build one. So little things that you can do to help yourself get the extra cash to build an emergency fund. So let's dive straight in and look at why you should have an emergency fund. So technically, unless you've been living under a rock, you will be aware of what's going on in the world. And it's quite terrifying. And inflation is just insane. And prices are going up massively. But not only that, we've got wars going on, we've got massive job layoffs everywhere. It's all a little bit scary. And I think you should never feel too comfortable in your situation. So I think a lot of people just think that an emergency fund is perhaps like a nice to have, or maybe that it's something that's just in case of losing your job or something, but it's so much more. So first thing, yes, job loss, because in reality, no job is safe. And even if you're amazing at your job, even if you work for a huge company, you never know. So obviously, one of the main reasons to have an emergency fund is in the event of a job loss. Secondly, we've got a really unsettling situation going on with Ukraine and everything going on over there. And I'm constantly reading about, tensions rising and potential escalations and things like that. And it does worry me, I'm not gonna lie. So to me, that is also a reason to try and build an emergency fund, because if things get worse, with that sense, you may just be thankful that you have some sort of cushion to fall back on. And we'll touch a bit on this in the how you should sort of store your emergency fund. I'm reading about more and more situations with bad health and costs there. Anything could happen with your house, your car, in terms of breakdowns that you might need to cover. And then lastly, you may think that this is a bit far-fetched, but for me, this is also one of the reasons that I really want to have some sort of preparations for an emergency, is more sort of doomsday type scenarios. So we're talking things like there was recently a situation where the sun has put out more wind. That basically has the power to knock out our energy grids. We've got a climate crisis that could cause all sorts of problems. Like, there's just so much that could happen. Think about what happened in 2020, that I'm not going to say the words because I don't want to, disrupt the algorithms, but a lot of situations. And I don't know about you, but I just sleep better if I know that I'm prepared at least a little bit. So, where you should store your emergency fund. Now, this is a question that I've actually been asked so many times. And the main reason people ask me this is more in terms of like which bank accounts I use, like specifically. So I will answer that. And there's no affiliate links for this bank or anything like that. But what I also want to draw your attention to is that I personally don't think that you should just keep your emergency fund only in a bank. Okay, so first things first, bank, yes. Obviously, you want to be earning interest on your emergency fund because you don't want it to be eroded by inflation, but you also don't want to be investing your emergency fund because it defeats the purpose. Because what if you invest it and then the stock market crashes just when you need the money and you've lost half of the value of your investments? So you don't want to be having to sell your investments at a loss to cover an emergency. So what you're looking for is a high interest, easy access savings account. So I use 2 of them. And this is one of the points I want to make is even with bank accounts, I personally have 2. There's been so many problems lately with banks collapsing and all of this stuff that it just makes me feel a little bit safer. It's sort of like why my investments, they will never be in just one platform. Again, I get this question a lot in terms of like, why do you have multiple platforms for your investments? And yes, partly it's because I do YouTube and I want to know the different platforms so that I can talk to you guys about them. But actually, even if I didn't, I wouldn't trust one platform enough with all of my money. And I have the same approach to banks. So the 2 banks that I use are Marcus by Goldman Sachs and Monzo. So these are the 2 places that I have my emergency fund savings accounts. So they both offer easy access, semi-high interest savings. So in terms of easy access, they've always been, whenever I've looked, one of the top ones for the rates they offer. Now, the next thing I want to mention, and the next way in which I think that it's worth looking at sort of having an emergency fund in, is cash. So this, unfortunately, obviously won't be protected by inflation, but I genuinely firmly believe that you should always, always, always have some cash on hand. So we're not talking like thousands and thousands of pounds here, but you should always have cash available, because what if, for example, the grid does go down or something happens with payment systems, you know? It's good to have that cash physically to be able to pay for stuff if you need it. The third way, and this is something that I'm currently doing research on and something that's really interesting to me and something that I 100% want to get into, is precious metals. So like not just investing in precious metals in the sense of like online, I'm talking like buying precious metals. And this is just in the event that anything were to happen like more widely with currencies, with banking, with anything like that. I think having sort of metals that you can trade is a good idea, firstly. And the second reason that I think having precious metals is good is because it is a hedge against the stock market crashing. So generally, if the stock market crashes, precious metals tend to go up. And the way that I've dealt with this in the past is just having sort of investments online in precious metals. But the more and more I think about it, the more I want to have the safety net of having some physically. Now, I'm not talking huge slabs of gold that you're never going to be able to sell in any sort of emergency. I'm talking buying like small coins or something that might be worth like 100, 200, 300 pounds rather than like slabs worth thousands that you see in the movies, because those will be easier to pawn and exchange in the event that you should need to. Okay, and here's the final thing that I want to mention that's a little bit more unconventional. And I also see investing in an emergency fund in investing in products in terms of like things I use that won't go off. So essentially like almost like disaster supplying, but not to that extreme, if that makes sense. So I'm thinking about products that I use every day. So for example, toilet paper or like cotton wool pads or sanitary products or anything like that, that, you know, even in the event of job loss, I'm not just talking about like crazy disaster theories here. I'm talking, you know, if you have job loss and you have no income, you're still going to want to use things like toilet paper, sanitary products and all that kind of stuff. Things that aren't cheap, and actually if you don't have to buy them when you have no income, it will help you out, right? So yes, you can then look at, once you've stocked up on those things, stocking up on food that maybe has a long expiration date, so cans and jams and whatever else, and then like rotating it. So that is a different ball game. But just initially stocking up on those sort of completely non-perishable items, and just having that in the back of your mind as well, that like, okay, at least that's a weight off my shoulders. You know, if I didn't have a job for 6 months, I at least don't have to worry about buying toilet paper, sanitary products, I don't know, toothpaste, whatever else. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that's inspired you to look at different ways of storing your emergency fund. And now let's have a look at different ways to build an emergency fund in terms of money. So essentially how to fund an emergency fund. Now, the first and most obvious way, if you have the money, if you have spare cash in your budget, just use that, right? But it's not that simple for a lot of people. And this section is going to be more geared towards people who perhaps don't have as much wriggle room to just say, okay, I'm just going to put £100 a month into this emergency fund. So you know what the first thing I'm going to say is, I think, if you've watched my channel in the past, and that is trying to get a side hustle. So I do realize that depending on your individual circumstances, your family situation, it may not be as easy, but usually there is something that you can do. You know, if you have children, can you think about, for example, utilizing family members or anything like that? Or maybe if you have friends who have children also, maybe you agree that each of you takes the kids so that the other has time to do work or leisure or whatever it is, so that you don't pay for childcare in order to do these side hustles. But oh my God, the world of side hustles is huge. You know, you could get, for example, yes, part-time job, great. Not everyone can commit, right? But then you've got things like tutoring. There are so many tutoring opportunities. You know, I've talked about teaching English online. You can do conversational English, you can do the qualification and do proper sort of tutoring for English. You can do pet sitting. There are so many pet sitting opportunities. You know, I did this so often and I still gave up so many opportunities because I didn't have the time. But I still made quite a bit of money in the past through pet sitting, babysitting. There are so many websites that you can sign up to. There's house sitting. There are just so many, you know, there's so many videos out there for side hustles. Just have a look. This isn't the type of video, but the main one that I would say in terms of like side hustles for people who maybe have other commitments is finding a 0 hours contract. I did that for a few years too, and that's great because you don't have to commit to a certain amount of hours per week. You don't have to commit to shifts up until pretty last minute, so you will be able to flex it around your schedule. The second thing I'm going to mention is doing a no spend challenge. So without realizing, I think a lot of people, I know that not everyone does this, but most people do. Or at least most people I speak to, is just buy stuff that they don't need. There's so much consumerism, right? So if you do a no spend challenge mindfully and say to yourself, I'm not spending anything outside of my bills, rent, and the necessary food that I need to survive and getting to and from work, you'd be surprised at how much you can cut out. So the additional takeaway here, the additional coffee here, oh, the extra shampoo because it was on offer that you don't need, all of this kind of stuff. If you cut it out, do a no spend challenge, you can use those funds to then sort of put into your emergency fund. Third one, automatic transfers. Okay, this is just like a bit of a Jedi mind trick because it's a bit like out of sight, out of mind. And if you automate it, it will make sure that you have some sort of saving every month. And you can do this in different ways. So you could, for example, just do a direct debit, write out a budget and say, okay, I have, I don't know, £400 for spending every month outside of bills. Let me do at least £100 a month into the emergency fund. And that way it goes out of my account and I don't see it in my account to physically spend it. Or you could do what I've done and do roundups. So most banks now offer the option to do roundups to transactions and put that money away into a separate account. So this is what I do. It means that I don't feel it as much when the money comes out of my account. So if I spend £1.90, 10p goes into my savings account and it works. I've saved up quite a lot from that. The next thing is selling anything you can. Basically, I'm a big believer in minimalism, and actually you'd be surprised at how many things you can sell in your house if you haven't already, obviously. But even things like clothes, you might think, okay, I don't have like big brand items that I might be able to sell. Because obviously if you have like, I don't know, a Zara blazer, you might be able to sell it on eBay for like a, maybe not a huge amount, but a good amount. But you might think, oh, well, all my clothes are just from like normal retail shops. But what you may not have thought of is doing bundles. So I know someone who essentially, when they were selling their stuff on eBay, the things that were less likely to sell on their own, they bundled up into the same sort of style and size and sold them as bundles, and it worked really well. So this is an idea for you to try if you feel like your stuff won't sell individually. And obviously any sort of unused items, definitely try to sell them. Cutting back on monthly bills is also a way of just beefing up your emergency fund. So many people, now people are getting more sort of aware about this. So it's like less and less people every year that do this, but a lot of people just let their contracts roll over. If they have home insurance, pet insurance, anything else, they just let it renew because they're like, oh, well, I'm still paying the same, or I'm just paying like a few pounds more per month. It doesn't matter, without looking for better deals. And if you look for a better deal and you find something for £5 cheaper per month, that's an extra £60 you have in your savings account for the year. And again, that might not seem like a lot, but if you don't have a job, £60 is a lot. Same goes for things like subscriptions, Spotify, Netflix, all of that kind of stuff. Yes, it won't make you a millionaire by cutting these out. I know there's so many memes out there and jokes about how the older generations are just telling millennials to cut out Netflix and then they can buy a house. Probably not. But cutting out Netflix and Spotify and things like that can help you beef up the emergency fund because all of these small transactions add up. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is that it's really worth setting yourself a goal of some sort and maybe breaking it down into smaller goals. So for example, you probably are aware that the ultimate sort of emergency fund is like 12 months of living expenses. But if you set that as your goal, you're going to get discouraged fairly quickly. So breaking it down into more manageable goals will really help motivate you. So for example, maybe set as your first goal just 1 month of an emergency fund. So add up all of your expenses, like necessary living expenses for the month, and just say, I just want 1 month for now. Once you've reached that, make it 3 months, then 6 months, and then 12 months. You know, the human mind is a weird tool, and if you make something too unachievable, you will get bored very, very quickly. Okay, I feel like I've been rattling on for a long time. I hope I can edit this and make it at least a manageable time. I really hope that you've learned something, at least one thing from this video. If you have, please let me know, because sometimes I make these videos and I feel like I'm just sort of preaching to the choir, if you will, that I'm telling you things you already know. So if I've given you anything new, please let me know. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.